Right, so in the next half hour or so, it's my job to paint, and I'm going to try and use a rather broad brush this time. The main themes that we're working on in the Dyalog team at the moment. I like to have a picture of a road in these presentations since it's a roadmap. We're looking, I think, west-southwest here, somewhere up on the northwest coast of Norway. It's actually about the middle of Norway, but it's all in the north, really. A couple of the perhaps difficult topics to begin with. Gid already mentioned we lost some giants. I'm happy to say that, in fact, there is also good news, because these are the three people who've come on board just in the last roughly a year or so. We do have some rising stars as well. And although...
You're not sharing your screen, I think.
Am I not sharing my screen? Ah, thank you. Right, I didn't see that on the chat. Apologies. So I'll just go back and show you very briefly the picture I was talking about a moment ago. There's this wonderful road up on the northwest coast of Norway. Right, Gita mentioned that we lost a couple of real giants, lighthouses in our community. We've actually been working for quite a long, over the last 10, 15 years on getting the right people in place. The three people we have pictured here are people who joined the company roughly in the last year or so. Before that, of course, we had Richard Smith come on board, Richard Park, Adam, and so on. But just in the last year, we've had Shuhao Yang and Carter Kuna join the development team as C developers. And I think most of you met Rodrigo last year when he talked about the work that he was doing on Bernard Legrand's tutorial. We are hoping to hire 1 or 2 more people in the coming year. So if you are interested in a career working on APL interpreters or tools, or you know somebody who might be interested in that, please let them know that they should get in touch with us. Another slightly tricky topic that we need to address this year is performance. Performance is something that we've seen as a really important activity in the Dyalog development team, and we worked steadily in every release to improve the performance. And we published this graph, our performance quality assurance graph, where we've divided primitives into 139 expression groups, and we track the progress each year of how these expressions are getting faster. When we released 18.0, which is now a good year and a half ago, we again had a very impressive looking graph. It was one of the really bumper releases. Unfortunately, after 18.0 was released to our users, and in fact, after some of our users had built product and shipped to their users, a small number of errors were found in the tuned algorithms. And we have, in fact, decided that we're going to roll all of those. As a result of this, we're going to roll all of the performance enhancements that were in 18.0 back for the next release. We've rolled these performance enhancements back. We are going to, of course, quickly move forward to restoring as many of them as we can do in the coming releases. We can see here that if we look at the graph for 18.2, one of the worst expressions is this IOTA 3.11.7, which we haven't yet restored the performance for. That's probably something we'll be doing fairly quickly. Now, what we realized in this work is we'd been doing this performance work for many years, and in fact, we were hiring new resource. We had new resource available to do work on performance. And we moved forward very quickly. What we didn't quite realize that we needed to ramp up the testing and the risk analysis for this performance work. And what we've decided to do is to introduce new guidelines for risk assessment before we make any changes to existing primitives. And we're also working very hard to increase unit tests and code coverage on future releases of Dyalog APL. A related topic is that we are introducing a methodology called BSIM, Building Security and Maturity Model. This is actually something we'd started on before version 18, because we had numerous customers who are making bids for out in the marketplace and asked to document that they are following best practices. In particular, as applications move to the cloud, there are a lot of questions asked about whether best practices are being followed relative to security. And to respond to that, we decided that we would implement this methodology so that our customers would be able to document that the software that they built upon was following best practices. As a result of the version 18 adventure, we've decided that we are going to apply this methodology not only to security risks, but to potential computational errors as well, because we consider them to be as high a risk at the end of the day to our customers as any of the classical security threats. And our plan is to, this is a very pragmatic framework which allows you to compare your routines to what are industry practices. And we are in the process of preparing for an audit report, which we hope will happen in 2022. We did have some distractions in the last 18 months. So on to hopefully more interesting and positive topics. Guido already mentioned this, so I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. I should mention that Stefan Krüger, who's at the bottom of the screen, he's not a Dyalog employee, but it's really encouraging to see that we're starting to get really high quality materials for learning APL and being trained in APL produced by people outside in the community. So one theme which has been important for many years now is, in general, to improve Linux support. Because a lot of new users coming to Dyalog APL are using Linux, but also because Linux has become the dominant platform for cloud deployment. And we see a lot of users who are actually doing their development either on macOS or Windows, deploying their solutions on Linux. Fortunately, Dyalog APL was born under Unix a long time ago now. And although in the period, say, roughly 1990 to 2005, most of the IDE and GUI development focused on Microsoft Windows, we still have a very platform agnostic platform. And since about, for the last 6 or 7 years, we've gradually been ramping up our work to support new platforms and Linux in particular. You can see this is a slide from Dyalog 14. And all the way back in 14, we were stating that our goal is to allow applications to be developed on any platform that we support and deployed on another. And I think we're getting quite close to that now, although we still have a lot to do. And Linux really is something that you find everywhere now. I just installed Windows 11 on a laptop, and this window here shows the all that I need to type in order to make Linux available on my Windows machine. WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux, and you just install and you can pick which Linux distribution you want to use. And now Linux is available so that if you want to do this development of applications on Windows and deployment to Linux, you can very easily test that without having to jump through hoops. Very soon, I think this is available to advanced test users of Windows. You can do the same with Android applications. We look at the features that are driven by the supporting Linux. Of course, the most important perhaps is the remote integrated development environment, also known as the RIDE, which is now in version 4.4. There's the scripting, the shebang scripting, which is sort of the standard way of running things under Linuxes, and the multi-line input that John Daintree talked about last year, which is an important part of making scripting really valuable and being able to define multi-line structures in scripts, and in general support for headless use. So running machines like Docker containers where there's no terminal attached, that's something that we've done a lot of work on in version 18.2. I've tried to indicate on some of these slides, as in the top left here, the 18.2 shows that this is something where we've done significant work on 18.2, in particular the scripting and the Docker containers. In most cases, the word Linux really means to us cross-platform, and pretty much everything that we do these days is designed, so both the work that we do on the interpreter, the RIDE, and all of the tools that we build on top are designed and tested to work on Windows, Linux, and macOS. An important work that we've done in 18.0 and we'll be continuing with in the next release are the work to support the new .NET framework, or it's not called framework, it's now called .NET 5.0. It was called Core for a while. And the work to create cross-platform configuration files. In general, a lot of the ways that APL applications have been developed historically have been sort of slightly at odds with industry practices. We're not necessarily saying that all APL users should switch to sort of big industrial ways of doing development, but it's very important to us that we make it possible for those APL shops that need to align with industry practices to do that easily. So the work on shell scripts, the public Docker containers that we now make available so that it's easy to get started with containerization, which is seen as one of the really important things from a security perspective. And one thing that we've committed to do in the next release cycle based on input from a lot of new users coming to APL is to review the way that we do keyboarding on all platforms, because there are things that we have implemented. I mean, Dyalog APL is now nearly 40 years old. Some of the ways we do keyboarding have a very long history, and it's time to take a new look at that. Yeah, so we'll be doing that, we promise. On and off, we've been doing work to support external editors. So the link work, VS Code plugin that's available. This is something that we haven't done a lot on in the last couple of years, but it's something that I expect we'll be returning to quite soon to look at whether we can hook up external debugging interfaces so that you can, if you are really comfortable with VS Code or Emacs, you'll be able to do debugging from there. There's no timeline for that. It may, it's not the highest priority, but it's something that we know in the long term is really important. So I'm going to take a little detour here and dive down a little bit. I said it would be a broad brush. So there's an example question from Jay Whipple. I see, what is an example of a keyboarding issue? I think particularly under some Linux distributions, the keystrokes that we were using to select the APL keyboard would do things like lock you out of the desktop. There are similar issues using virtual machines on Windows and so on. Yep. So I'm going to talk a little bit about RIDE 4.4. So RIDE is the remote IDE that we've developed to complement the Windows IDE. And it is available on all of the supported platforms. So on Linux and Mac, and of course on Windows as well. It's not available on AIX because AIX doesn't really have a desktop, but you can connect RIDE to an AIX system from any one of the other platforms. So this is just to show a few details of what's in the latest RIDE release, which is 4.4. So there's support for all of the threading menu items to allow you to debug multi-threaded applications. And as Linux is more and more used as a server environment, that's a really important piece of functionality to have available. There's standardization. We're trying to make the help menus look much more like the Windows menus, because there are lots of people who are using both the Windows IDE and the RIDE. So it's good to have them look similar. And there's find and replace, little bits of functionality that have been missing where the RIDE is catching up with the Windows environment. The stuff colored red here is just to show you that the RIDE now supports, it gives status information about system variables and the state of threads and so on. One really important piece of new functionality in RIDE 4.4 for those who've been working with text files is that you can now get RIDE to remember the answers to questions like this one that the interpreter will pop up and ask you whether you want to just save text to a file or fix it in the workspace. On Windows, you've had this save this response, didn't have that on RIDE, which drove some people wild. Now RIDE supports that. And of course, it also has the ability to go in and edit the answers that you've saved. And then for some people, these are real actual highlights, literally speaking. There are new color schemes available. A lot of these, I think, were made available to us because RIDE is an open source repository, and people have actually submitted from outside the Dyalog development team color schemes. It's really nice. Thank you.
There's a question about where we plan to develop a new keyboard.
Right. So there's a question from David Vellers about whether we're planning to develop a new keyboard, and it depends a little bit on what the question means. We're not thinking of changing the actual layout of the APL symbols. It's more about how you select APL characters on the keyboard. So the RIDE, we have the so-called backtick or introducer keyboard. On Windows, we typically use Control. And all of these have different issues on different platforms, and we're going to spend significant time trying to figure out how we come up with a keyboarding scheme that really works well on all of the platforms. Maybe we'll need a couple of different schemes to satisfy everybody. So those were a detailed dive into a few of the new features of RIDE. This slide is just to show you that RIDE is an open source repository, and you can go and look at all the issues there. Everything is logged, and as they're closed, you can follow the work on RIDE. Okay, there's a question from Jay. Will the new RIDE be able to interrupt quad sh commands that hangs? And I'm afraid there's really nothing, as far as I know, there's nothing we can do about that. A member of the development team may be able to correct me on that, but I see Jason Rivers says he'd like to answer the question.
Just because he's
the problem there is that once APL has given control to some other program via a shell call. We may not get control back. So I'm not aware of a solution to that. It's possible somebody can come up with it. We do recognize that that's an issue, but I'm not sure we have a solution for that. Okay, so in general, another broad theme that we're looking at, service orientation. And this is something we're seeing, the new applications being developed in APL these days, a very large and increasing proportion of the code is being delivered as services of one form or another. And although we would really like to provide full stack solution, as APL always historically has done, where you can develop the user interface as well, we recognize that many organizations really want to move in the direction of service orientation. And I think I've mentioned this before, but if you haven't looked at Jarvis yet, that is our solution for wrapping APL code as HTTP RESTful services, or just HTTP JSON, which is, I think, what most people are really looking for. Anyway, RESTful is quite a complicated paradigm if you want to do it properly. But Jarvis will handle all of those. And I think, in fact, of all the systems I've looked at this last year where new code is being developed, they have pretty much all used Jarvis. So take a look at that if you haven't already. And I already mentioned the work gone into version 18, so that if you built one of these services, it's easier to deploy it on Docker and debug it, etc. For many of the larger shops, this concept of development operations, where you construct your systems in such a way that essentially as soon as a code change is made or committed to the system, QA immediately kicks in, and if code passes QA, it's moved into production. That's, again, we're not saying everybody needs to do that, but it's very important that APL systems can be good citizens in this world. And so maybe the most important thing we've been working on the last year is Link, which makes it really easy. I'll be talking about that tomorrow, to use source code management systems, or at least store your source code in text, which is really at the heart of many of these DevOps systems. There's a package manager prototype, which looks like it might actually be the package manager that we're all going to be using going forward. And the shebang scripting simplifies automation and makes DevOps easier. Internally at Dyalog, we're drinking the Kool-Aid, so we're working towards continuous integration of all of our APL tools. As they're committed on GitHub, they'll be going through this kind of machinery. And now we're finally sort of really getting into looking a bit more forward at what's coming. Technologically, there's a new chip, the 64-bit ARM chip, which is now used in the new Macs, these so-called M1 Macs. There's a Raspberry Pi, 64-bit seems to be really catching on there. And there are Android versions, Android has been using ARM64 for a long time, of course, and Windows as well. We will look at experimental versions of Dyalog APL for that. We're going to review all the compilers that we use. This is something we do regularly every few years to see whether there's performance to be gained by upgrading compilers. We don't like to do it too often because there's often new runtime requirements which impact our customers. Yeah, so this is an important thing that we work on with every release. We want to reduce the cost of ownership. We realize I perhaps went a bit overboard on that at the beginning of this presentation. We realize that the last year has been a bad year in terms of cost of ownership, at least for some of our customers who moved quickly to ship. This is something that we take very, very seriously, and it's going to be at the heart of everything that we do in the next release also. A lot of new process. Hopefully it won't slow us down too much, but just enough to make sure that we don't make the kind of mistakes that we did in version 18. One thing that I've really been looking forward to for I think before I joined Dyalog, is the idea of Microsoft patch files. On all platforms except Windows, you've been able to just run an installer and it would upgrade all parts of your Dyalog installation. With version 18.2, we make that available for Microsoft Windows as well, which is, we've been testing that for the last month or so with the 18.2 beta, and it's absolutely brilliant. And then more traditional topics, improving the productivity of APL programmers. We've talked about RIDE. There are, although version 18.2 doesn't have a huge amount of new functionality, there are some goodies that various people will be talking about over the next couple of days. And there are presentations on the middle one, so I'll just mention a little bit more about the last one. If you're still using Win32 GUI and there's some little thing that that would be useful to you, you can still talk us into making enhancements to the Win32 GUI. We know it's going to be there for a very long time. So we've just added a couple of things in version 18.2. One of them is this corner title background color. So forever since Quad WC was invented, you haven't been able to control the color of this top left-hand corner. Now you can. And there's a fire once property on a timer so that you don't get into this problem where the timer starts firing and then you lose control of your session because it's just firing rapidly and you're not able to interrupt it. There are also a number of new user commands and utilities that Adam will be talking about later today, I think. So Adam has been one of the, I think, the most spectacular things that Adam has done in recent years is this Apple Cart website. If you haven't seen that, I recommend you take a look at it, because when teaching APL courses recently, we found that if you tell students about this, they're really able to quite quickly find out a lot of stuff when they're learning APL. So here's the old, I think the bottom one is the old fin APL progressive dyadic iota idiom. And it's one of my favorite things I need to look up every, I don't know how many years. That's in Apple Cart. And in version 18.2, there's a user command. So you can just say bracket Apple Cart and some search expression, and Apple Cart will get back to you, or you'll get the result of Apple Cart. We do also have plans, so despite the loss of John Scholes and Roger Huey, we do have ambitions to continue to enhance the APL language. We may be going a little bit slowly for the next year or two. But one thing that's been in the pipeline for quite some time is the array notation that if you want to create a structure like this, you should be able to write it with something nice and simple. And Adam is in the process of writing up, I think you may have finished this. It's on the APL wiki somewhere. We hope to really complete the specification, get community buy-in, and start the implementation of this soon. Then I'm running out of time a bit, so I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but I'll put the slide up so you can see it. There are a number of APL operators that we know would be good to have, in particular under. And one of the reasons we haven't done this yet is that there's a discussion about computational versus structural under, which again, you'll find a discussion of on the APL wiki. There's a growing demand for a depth operator, so that's also something we'll be looking at in the years to come. And perhaps the biggest idea is the notion of having multiple numeric towers. It's been a problem for us for many years that we haven't felt we could easily accommodate 64-bit integers and rational types into APL. And there are ideas forming in the development group, which we'll be researching. Again, this is probably something we'll take our time to research this and reach out to the community and make sure that we do this right. But we think we may actually have ideas for a really comprehensive way where users will be able to nicely control when they use decimals, when they don't, and include the 64-bit integer and unlimited precision types into a coherent grand unified theory of multiple mathematical numeric towers. And then there's a question for the Holy Grail. I've run out of time, so I'm going to just tell you immediately what the Holy Grail is. It's simple cross-platform user interfaces. And you could say, well, we've already got that. We've got the HTML renderer. You can type this expression on any platform, and it's going to give you the same thing. So yeah, we've already got one. Unfortunately, it's quite challenging to generate the HTML JavaScript in a way which is simple for APL users to control. And we've been working on various, my server has had stuff built into it for years. We have DUI. We don't see people really catching on or deciding to use this. And but we do see some signs that maybe the community is about to come to our assistance. So one thing that looks really promising to me is that Paul Mansour again is out designing software, and he's creating this thing called Abacus, which is a project to generate HTML from simple APL code. And I recommend, if you're interested in this, go and have a look at what he's doing and feedback to him and to us whether this is something that Dyalog should be taking a closer look at. So with a couple of seconds to go, the release schedule, 18.2 is in beta. We hope to release it before the end of the year. 19.0, we're not yet in a position to say.
22, should be 21.
Oh, I said 22. Well spotted, Gita. Right, thank you. I ran out of time for questions, but we did take a few as we went. So I'll declare myself satisfied and hand over to JD